Hi friends and other quarantined artists. My name is Anthony Wiegard. I'm a freelance scenic charge and designer in Philadelphia. And today I'm going to show you how to paint marble. Special thanks to Theater Horizon for keeping us busy and sane during our quarantine. And this is how I'm going to spend it. Hopefully showing you how to paint something really cool that you might have fun doing at home. Okay, so the first thing you want to do is prime whatever your surface is. In this case, I'm just using a 2x3 piece of scrap that I had laying around, but it could be a tabletop, it could be any number of things that you want to paint marble. What I would recommend is that you start with a sample board. This is just a piece of 1x1 Luan. Always test out your treatment first to make sure that you know what you're doing and you have your process figured out before you move on to your finished piece. The tools that you will need, we're going to be using just a standard, mine's a 2-inch Purdy lay-in brush. If you have 3-inch, that's fine, whatever you have. We're going to use a sea sponge. Now this is going to be used for texturing and moving paint around. If you don't have a sea sponge, I have in a pinch taken like a car wash sponge and just pulled out little chunks to give it some of that texture that we get in a sea sponge. And then we're going to be using a Fitch brush later. You could also, you could use any acrylic brush that's got long hairs on it. You could also use a feather. And then I just have a standard spray bottle full of water. Got my bucket of water over here. So I would highly recommend that you get an image online, wherever, of marble and keep it close by. I'm not going to paint this exact marble. I have definitely had situations where I was supposed to paint the particular type of marble or something, but in this case, I'm just using this for a little bit of visual reference so that I know what I'm painting actually does happen in life. It's very easy to kind of get caught up with you already know what it looks like and just start painting from your head. So having something that's grounded in reality close by just to inform some of your decisions can be quite helpful. So the first step of this process, so I've chosen this green, this blue, just stuff I have laying around really, and then I'm going to be using some black and some white later for the veining. So back to my image, even though this is more of an emerald green, I'm going to base this idea in this green. So the first thing you want to do, I often spray my surface down with a little bit of water just to help get the paint flowing. And then we want to pretty much cover this mostly. Excuse me, I'm a sloppy painter, so that's why I got cardboard and everything down, because I make a mess. I think it's just part of the fun, personally. So we're going to cover this whole thing. And I wouldn't worry about it too much if you have these variations in light and dark. In fact, in some ways, they'll help you. So don't stress yourself out about getting this to be a solid color. Oh, and I should mention, we're going to be adding colors on top of this in a method of painting we call a scumble in the scenic art world. You're basically going to be applying your paint in quick little X motions as a means of blending them together. So get that wrist action to be fairly comfortable, because it's going to come up a lot. And that's true for all of scenic art. I can't imagine very many treatments that don't start with a scumble. Whether you're painting brick or you're painting concrete. So then I just want to offer some variations in color. I'm not trying to come up with a certain pattern. I'm just kind of trying to have some color variation and also some value variation. Because if we look at this, which is pretty much just many values of the same green with some black. So I just want to kind of create some of these little pockets of light and dark so that as we start moving through the layers, it almost looks liquid. Then I'm going to spray this whole surface down with water. Exactly how much water? It's a little. Basically you want your paint to start pooling a little bit so that you can use gravity to help you move it around. So we're going to let that sit for a couple of minutes, just to pull up some of the paint and make it fluid so we can move it around. But in the meantime, I would like to take you on a very strange journey into marble itself. So marble, the reason I like to use the word fluid is because when marble is made, it's actually magma that heats up limestone and something else, I forget. And when it recrystallizes into this calcite form, that's how we get marble. But it's very much liquid for the earlier stage of its life. And that's true for anything you're painting. If you're just stressing something, it helps to think, well, what happened to cause this to become like this? It's usually wind or rain or rust or salt. Oh yeah, salt, that's the best one. But in this case, we just want to think of this as fluid. You can see right here, we're getting some of this black to trail through. And we're just gonna move this paint around a little bit. So in this case, we're using water to make this fluid, but I have been asked in the past to paint marble on a vertical surface. And if that happens, what I would recommend is to take some of your paint and suspend it in some sealer. So, you know, here I have some polyacrylic clear semi-gloss sealer. If I was painting this vertical, I would want to use that sort of as my water, and it would thin out and there'll be less pigment, so it'll be more likely to flow in this similar way. It doesn't look exactly the same, but obviously you can't do this if it's vertical because everything will just run straight down to the floor. It will make your paint appear a little bit more white in color because the sealer's white, but it'll dry to the same color. Another product you could use if you're working vertically, or, you know, I could even do it here if I didn't want to use water for some reason. There's this product called Faux. It's basically just latex, and it's the same idea, is that it'll thin your pigment down. Be nice to your brushes. As soon as you're done using them, pop them in some water. And in this case, because I'm going to turn the fan on, I'm actually going to cover my paints up too. When you're working a wet treatment like this, and I should mention this as well, when you're working a wet treatment like this, you want to make sure that your base coat is well dry, because this water is going to thin the binder and the paint. And I actually, when I sampled this yesterday, I hadn't let the bottom layer dry enough, and it actually started to peel up on me, and I had to start over. So, quick little tip, with wet surfaces, it's going to take a lot longer to dry, and also just don't rush your layers. If you try to rush your layers, you're going to end up with a big muddy mess, and you're going to be mad at yourself. So, I think I'm reasonably happy with this, and I'm going to let it dry. So I'm going to put a fan on this. Now, if you were to be painting this vertically, or if I was using sealer horizontally, you want to make sure not to put a fan on a surface that has sealer in it, because it'll actually cause the top layer to dry faster than the underneath layer, and it'll turn the entire thing like a hazy, foggy, and you'll have a very hard time getting that back, if at all. It's almost impossible. So sealer, no fan. I'm going to walk away from this for a little while, and we'll check back and get ready for our next layers. So I think I'm just about dry enough. It's probably been about, I don't know, an hour. Might be a little damp yet, but I think we'll probably be fine. So again, the second layer now is pretty much going to be almost identical to the first layer. The first layer is about getting some color down that we can build stuff up from. So I'm going to go ahead and spray the surface down again. Just a little bit of mist. I want to go crazy. Then we're going to go ahead and kind of just the same thing we did before. We're just going to add some color over top. So, you know, pay attention a little bit to the colors that you've done before. You know, keep an eye on the reference image if you're using one. I certainly, if you've never done marble before, I would say it would benefit to try to stick closely to your marble, your research image. That way you don't get kind of lost in the minutia. And again, this technique that we're using is called a scumble, S-C-U-M-B-L-E. That's what they call it in scenic art, at least. It's kind of like cross hatching. It's, you know, I know I'm moving kind of quickly with it. It's something that just kind of gets into your wrist over time. You know, I've been painting for the better part of half of a decade, at least scenic art wise. So it just becomes kind of second nature to do that when I paint now. And it's just a means of kind of lazily really moving your paint around and blending it. So we'll blue this up a little bit. I really love these blue-green tones that we're getting in the center, so I'm going to probably try to pull a little bit of that out into other parts. Don't forget, every once in a while you may need to rinse your brush out a little bit with some water. All right, I think we're gonna jump in here with the sponge now. So, I'm gonna take your sponge, dampen it a little bit. Bring it out pretty well. And now we're going to be using the sponge to kind of give us some texture. So what I usually do is I like to fold the sponge up in whatever way. You know, this side has a different pattern than this side. So I usually fold it up where I like it. And what we're gonna do is we're gonna constantly be changing our direction as we move through this. And that'll get, you know, so it doesn't look uniform. And then another thing you might wanna kind of just keep in mind that, you know, you don't wanna go into the dark necessarily and then kind of poison your white and have that turn gray. So I usually stick with sort of light colors to start. So I'm probably going to start here and try to fade this edge out a little bit. Now you can't really do this in the first step as much because even here you see where we didn't have a lot of paint. Because I'm using a sponge that's relatively clean and doesn't have any pigment on it, it pulls pigment up. So if you don't put the first layer in and let it dry completely, then you'll end up showing your primer layer through. Let's go to that side. All right, so at this point, I think it's really easy to overwork your surface. As you see, I kind of have to fight the temptation to do it myself. So now what I think we're gonna do is add a little bit more water. We're gonna let this sit for just a couple of minutes. And then again, we're gonna move it around a little bit. Okay, so I think I'm pretty happy with where that's at the moment. And at this point, I just need to let it dry again. And one thing I will say with using the fan, don't put your fan too close because while it's wet like this, you could actually end up blowing, your color around. So just keep that in mind. We want to feel the air, but we don't want it to be pushing the paint. Okay, so the next step of this process is going to involve your handy dandy Fitch brush or liner brush, whatever you're using. I'm going to use a combination of both of these. Now, you want to probably at this point change your water because we're going to be working with a lot of water and you want it to be mostly just clean, plain water. So, I've already done that. Now what we're going to do, this is where having the reference image is really helpful, because veining is one of those things that's just not very intuitive per se. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take some water on our liner brush, and we're going to, I'm going to follow this idea here, this vein, and we're just going to trace it out in water for now. So it's got like a little, and trace out maybe like your biggest ones to start with, kind of like that one. And I'm shaking my brush a little bit as I go, just to give it a little zhuzh. And this guy is going to come down. There it is. Big decisions. I don't know if you can see that, what I'm tracing out or not, but it'll become apparent in just a minute here. All right, so now take a little white paint, and we're going to just kind of move through those same things that we just traced. So let's go here. So we're just going to very lightly and sort of with the same shakiness go through those water lines. And you want some variations of tone, so if it's not white enough, or if it's too white, add some water, and if not, add some additional paint, because some of these are going to become really like super bright spots, and the other we're going to kind of want to bury. But you don't have to think too much about it. Just keep in mind that we want a variant line. And this is one of those things where you can really do as much or as little as you want. And don't be too hard on yourself if it doesn't look right. There's a lot going on right now, and we're going to change some stuff up here in a minute. But again, it's just paint. If you really don't like it, you could paint over it. So I'm pretty happy with this for the purpose, this demonstration. With this layer and with the last layer, if you wanted to go and, you could repeat step 2 before you do this veining and get more depth if you're not really feeling the way that's come out. And you can get crazy with veins if you want to. I think for me, I'm just going to stop here and allow this to dry. Right now, all of our veining is sitting on the surface of this marble. But that's not really what happens, because it sort of weaves its way inside and outside of a three-dimensional stone. So what we want to do is to take these veins that we've just created and bury some of them, so to speak, into the marble. So I'm gonna mostly stick with the green in this part of the process, because that's sort of the base of our whole marble. So we're gonna use the sponge. We obviously don't want all this craziness here, so we're just gonna kind of blend out some of that color. We're going to bury parts of these veins and leave other parts visible. This one has a lot of high value portions in it, so to me it already wants to kind of be on the top. And if you've added too, if you've got too much paint, you can take whichever brush. My liner brushes are pretty clean at the moment, so you can pull some of that. Oh, you see that? That had some wet still in it. That's what happens when I'm impatient. Just be wary of that, especially when the veining had a lot of water in it already, so it doesn't have as much binder. So if you work that surface too much, you'll actually just, pull that paint away. I will say this is one of those parts where, if you can, it helps to step back from your piece a little bit. I'm just going to tilt that up and walk maybe 10 feet away and see how it looks. So all I'm doing here is just adding some little offshoots, some little veins, so that it doesn't, it looks a little strange if you end just like that. So you want to take edges like that and just let your paintbrush dance a little bit. Paintbrush dance party. Do this portion with a feather. So you basically take the edge of a feather and you dip it, and you can twist it and pull it in ways that give you some of these more narrow and fat areas. I don't have a feather here at the moment. Another method you could do is, if you take your crunchiest rag, you can ball it up. This is a bad example of the type of rag you might want to use, but if you have like more of like a t-shirt type rag, if you ball it up something like this, you put some rubber bands around it, then you roll it in paint, and you can just very lightly roll it over the surface, and that'll give you a piece of marble that has a lot of those little tangent veins and sort of craziness happening. All right, I think I'm gonna call that there. Okay, so I'm decently happy with how my marble has turned out. And certainly if you are unhappy with it, spend a little bit extra time on these layers. If you got the time, it can only improve. But I don't want to drive myself crazy, because I will. I'm really good at that. So I'm going to go ahead and move to the last step. And this step is oh so important, because it just brings this whole thing together. Right now, we're still looking at something that, while has some depth and depth to it, it's still kind of appearing really flat. So, sealer. Gotta put some sealer on it. That's really gonna just bring this whole piece to life. You'll be very surprised. You can certainly apply sealer with a brush. If you do, I would use something that's decent quality, so that you don't have a lot of brush strokes in your piece. But since I have one here, it's a good opportunity to introduce you to this tool. This is actually for deck stain, but it works really well for applying sealer to a flat surface. See, I'm rushing this a little bit. I'm getting some white streaks from my paint. That's why I say it's not a good idea to rush your dry time. See, I've got some blue on here, which means that this really wasn't dry enough to seal. But as long as I don't overwork the surface, it'll be fine. So I'm gonna let that first coat of sealer dry for at least an hour, and then I would always recommend putting 2 coats of sealer on it if you have the time and the supplies, the materials. So I'm gonna let this dry, no fan, because that'll cause it to get foggy, like I had mentioned earlier. And in about 2 hours, I'll come back and I'll do a second one, and then we'll see what it looks like. Hello again, friends. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope it was informative and you can have some fun with it. Again, thank you to Theater Horizon for affording myself and everybody that's watching this opportunity to stay busy and learn something while they're quarantined at home. So I have my finished marble piece here. Sorry, I know there's a little bit of light reflection. I'm decently happy with how it turned out, but again, it's just paint. If you don't like it, repaint it. That's the beauty of it. And mostly have fun. This isn't supposed to be a chore. This is supposed to be something you can do, keep yourself busy and happy and to grow. With all this time that we're having, I think it's important that we spend a little bit of time focusing on ourselves and self-improving. So often we don't have the time to really invest in ourselves, and now we do. Whether, maybe not the way we wanted it to, but we do have it. So stay home, stay safe, keep arting, and have fun.